Hey now, Brawlers, it's time for another Board Game Brawl review with Nick Minahan, sponsored by BoardGameBliss.com. Hey now, today we're going to take a look at More Cash and More Guns. This is the first expansion to the second edition of Cash and Guns. I think the original Cash and Guns had more than one expansion by the time that they stopped producing it, but this is the first expansion for the new one, and there'll probably be more, I would guess. Now, this is the type of expansion that adds a lot more of the elements that you already hopefully liked from the first one. If you want to know whether you do or not, you can go ahead and watch my review. I'll have a link up in the top corner of the screen. But in addition to adding more stuff, as the name implies, it also adds some interesting twists and even a brand new mechanism that changes the divvying of the loot significantly. So let me go ahead and give you a brief look at how this expansion works and how it integrates into the base game. Then we're going to come back. I'll let you know what I think. Alright, I'm going to go over all the new stuff that comes in the More Cash and More Guns expansion to Cash and Guns. First off, if you choose to play with the expansion, you have to modify the setup slightly. Most of it is still the same, but first off, there's going to be 16 new loot cards, as you can see here. You're going to shuffle those into the rest of the loot cards for the game, and you're still going to make 8 piles of 8 cards, but that's going to leave you with, because there are 16 new cards, 16 extra cards. Those 16 extra cards that you get after you're done shuffling go underneath this new safe tile, and we'll get back to that in a minute. You also have new power cards and a new type of card called surprise cards. The new power cards get shuffled into the other power cards from the base game, and now the book recommends that you shuffle all those cards up, and then when you're dealing them out to the players, deal 2 cards out to each player face down. Each player chooses one of those 2 cards to keep, and then puts the other one face up, puts that one face up, and then puts the other one back into the box. And you'll do the same thing with the new surprise cards. Each player gets to choose from 2. However, in this case, the card that they choose to keep, they keep face down in front of them, hence the reason they're called surprise cards. And as you can see, there are new guns in the game, and we'll get to all those and what exactly they do. Alright, let's start with the loot cards, and we'll explain what the new loot cards are. First off, you have 2 different types of denominations, $10,000 and $20,000 bills, that are counterfeit. That means that they're potentially worth nothing at the end of the game, unless the Godfather decides that they're worth something. So now, with the More Cash and More Guns expansion, it actually benefits people to take the Godfather on the last round of play, to take the Godfather's desk. Because at the very end, after you finish the last round, the Godfather, whoever that happens to be, will decide whether or not the counterfeit money is worth anything. So that actually gives a very, very huge incentive to taking that desk in the last round. Also counterfeit, or should I say forged, is the forged painting. And what this is that at the end of the game, whoever has the forged painting can choose to spend $20,000 to make it a real painting. They can keep it forged if they want to, if it's not going to really make a big deal for them. But if they have enough paintings where spending $20,000 could make them a much bigger profit because they move into a new bracket for having a larger collection, that might definitely be worth it for them. Next, keeping with the fake theme, you have the fake diamonds. Now, this card counts as 2 diamonds that are worth nothing. However, for the purposes of getting majority of diamonds and getting that huge $60,000 diamond, it counts as 2. So it might still be worth it for you to take that card. Then we have the key and the suitcase. Now, the key and the suitcase could end up both in the same player's hand at the end of the game, or they could each end up in different players' hands. But regardless, as long as they are in play, in someone's hands, and both of those players or that player are still alive, they will each count as $25,000. If that is not the case, like let's say someone has the suitcase but the other player who had the key is dead, then that card is worth, the suitcase is worth 0. So they both have to be in play either in 2 different alive players' hands or in one player's hand together, in which case that player gets $50,000. Next is the combination to the safe. Now, the safe does a couple of different things in the game, but one of them has to do with this card. If you take this as your loot for the turn, you take the combination, you immediately get to look through all the cards underneath the safe tile, which again is this tile. That will have 16 cards in it at the start, underneath it, secret at the start of the game. If you play one of the combination cards, you choose a card of your choice from those cards without showing anyone else the contents of the safe, and then without changing the order, put all the remaining cards back underneath the safe tile. So it just lets you go fishing for a card of your choice to add to the rest of your loot stack. And speaking of the safe, as long as we're on the subject, this is another new thing having to do with the Godfather. So I don't know why I felt the need to put that by itself like that, but so what this is, when it is time to divvy up the loot, whoever the Godfather is, assuming they're still alive in the rounds, instead of taking a share of the loot from the 8 cards or the Godfather's table as per usual, they can instead choose to take cards from the safe. When they choose to take cards from the safe, they're going to take the top 2 cards off the top of the stack of cards that are underneath the safe. This is why keeping the order of the cards is important when you use the combination. But you'll take the 2 top cards from the safe, look at them secretly, choose one of them to keep for yourself, and then give one to your right-hand man or woman, the player literally sitting to your right. If the player sitting to your right is dead, it goes to whoever is still alive to your right. Although, if the player to your immediate right is just wounded or chose to jump out of the round or lay down for the round, they still get that. It's only if they're dead that they're not going to get that share of the loot and it'll go to the next player in sequence. A couple of other things. It's whoever is the current Godfather, not whoever took the Godfather's desk this round. So whoever chose to take the desk last round still remains Godfather for this entire turn and can still take their safe action. They only get to do the safe action once per round. Also, it doesn't really count as a share, of taking a share, which means that once all 8 of the shares of loot and the Godfather's desk are gone from the middle of the table, the round is still going to end. So if you don't do it fast enough, it's possible that the Godfather won't have a chance to go into the safe. But if the loot that's already out on the table is really good, you might give up that opportunity. Next, let's talk about the new power cards. There are only 3 new power cards that will be mixed in with the rest of them. First up, you have the Brute. The Brute simply says that when you get wounded, you do not have to lie down, which means you still get to share in the loot process. But you still take that wound, which means that you still might eventually die, but at least you still get to get some loot whenever that happens to you. Then you have the big gun, which is what this is, the big Magnum revolver here. When you have this power, you'll actually take the big gun at the start of the game and put your basic gun back into the box. When you play a bang card, it inflicts 2 wounds to your opponent if they had no wounds. At the beginning of the turn, inflict only 1 wound if they were already wounded. So that could potentially be very deadly to your opponents. And then finally, you have the twin gun. So instead of taking your basic gun, you'll put that back in the box and take the 2 twin guns. Now, I messed this up and lost it, but you're supposed to keep one of the little cardboard or foam plugs in one of the guns. I always have to improvise something since I lost the one that I had. And that signifies that gun is the fake gun. So only one of your twin guns is actually real. The other one is fake. And on each turn, you can aim at 2 different players, but only the real gun has the potential to do damage if you actually put a bang down on the table. And again, it's whichever one has what it's supposed to be the plug, but in this case is a piece of paper. Or actually, I'm sorry, it's whichever grip is complete is the real gun. It doesn't matter. All you have to know is that one of them is fake, one of them is real. Then you have the Imitator. When a player is eliminated from the game, you get to take their power card. Seduction. After the Godfather has used their privilege to make another player target a different player, then you force all players who are aiming at you to aim at the players of your choice. And then you have the Magic Bullet and the Crazy Bullet, which both work the same, just in different directions. The Magic Bullet, when you would inflict a wound with a bang, you also inflict one on the next player to the right of your target who didn't lie down. And this one just says it's to the left of the target who didn't lie down. And there are quite a few other surprise cards, but I'll let those be a surprise. But that's it. That's the stuff that comes in More Cash and More Guns. As the name implies, it's just a lot more of the same kind of stuff that was in the base game with some interesting twists. Now, let's get to my final thoughts. So when I'm reviewing expansions, there's always a category of expansion that is just more of the same. And that is definitely not always a bad thing, even though it sounds like it's negative. Because when a game is already good and it's giving you more variety of the things that you already enjoy, not a bad thing at all. And I think that parts of More Cash and More Guns fall into that category. More types of loot cards that don't they are different, but they don't change the game drastically. Those are a good thing to have to add more variety, because it can be true that in the original Cash and Guns, you can start to feel like you're playing the same game over and over again because you're seeing the same kind of loot come out to the table. So having more of that, having more of the power cards, that's always a good thing to do. And the surprise cards, while those are brand new to this expansion, they function basically like the power cards. They're just, as the name implies, a surprise in their one-time use. But again, it's another thing that makes you distinct from the other players and functions a lot like the powers, but it's good to have, and I'm glad that they're there, and it's just more stuff for you to enjoy. Now, the thing that is very different about this game, well, a couple of things. First is the counterfeit money, and that is, a lot of elements of this expansion easily slip into the original base game, and I would include the counterfeit money with that, and I think that that is one of the best parts about this expansion. Not in and of itself, like the idea of, hey, counterfeit money might only be worth something if the Godfather deems it to be so at the end. In and of itself, that's fairly interesting, but not like colossal. But the fact that it is enabling the Godfather to have decision-making capability at the end of the game is a big deal, because it means that in the final round of the game, it is perfectly viable to take the Godfather's desk and become the Godfather for the end of the game. Now it actually means something. It is important. So I appreciate that that's there, and I hope that further expansions make that even a more appealing choice. Like, instead of playing with counterfeit money, there's some other very relevant thing that could happen if you're the Godfather for the end, because I always like it when choices have more weight and something doesn't just feel useless, and that definitely is important with this expansion. And again, the idea of the counterfeit money is a fun thing as well. Now, the safe, that I think, while it's not a difficult thing to incorporate into the game, it's the one thing that I can envision a lot of play groups saying, let's just not play with that. Only because it is significantly different than everything else. It is sort of tacked onto the game, and you don't need it to fully enjoy it. It is an interesting aspect to it, giving, again, the Godfather a different choice to have every round. It does make the Godfather, again, a little more appealing, but I think that the Godfather already has enough to do during the normal rounds of the game, and it is slowing the game down just a hair. Especially when you add in the combination cards, it's just another thing to do during the game. But it's not a big deal, but I do think that it's probably the most skippable part. I will probably push to play with it just because I've played the original Cash and Guns so much that I just want to, at least for a little while, I want to keep playing with as much of the new stuff as I can. But I could take it or leave it. It is interesting, though, because of the 16 loot cards. I guess you could just forget the combination cards, throw all the other cards in, and get rid of the safe, and it wouldn't really affect the game too much. This isn't really a game about balance, so I wouldn't necessarily worry about it. And again, I like the new power cards. I like the new surprise cards. I like the new guns. Those are a very cool aspect of the game, just because it's cool to have more guns to play around with. I wish that the secret guns, and I mentioned in my overview, I screwed up and lost like the foam core element of one of them, so now I have to jury rig one of them to be marked as the real gun. Whatever. I wish that wasn't the case, but otherwise it's cool to have those and to have the big magnum gun. Just a very cool element. I mean, look, this is not going to change anyone's mind about Cash and Guns, but if you already do enjoy Cash and Guns, or maybe it could change someone's mind if they were like, I just wish there was a little something more to this game, a little more decision making, and a little more strategy. I think this does add that element to it, and again, it makes the Godfather much more viable. And so I like it. It's a good expansion, a good solid expansion to a good solid game. If you already love Cash and Guns, you should definitely already have this, because you really can't go wrong with it. That is More Cash and More Guns from Repos and Asmodee. Check it out if you love the game. Thanks for watching. Follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and Patreon. And make sure to check out our sponsor, Board Game Bliss, where you can find an amazing selection of games from around the world. BoardGameBliss.com. Thanks for your support.